So this podcast is not just for my introverts who do really great with being alone, but even for my extroverts, the people that typically feel energized when they're out and about amongst people and feel drained when they're by themselves. My goal is that for anyone listening to this podcast, that they're actually able to see the benefits to actually having time by yourself. And that's what I'm gonna go about in this podcast episode. So one show that I really loved watching growing up was called Dragon Ball Z. So this is an anime show and it has a famous character named Goku. Now, Goku was one of the most powerful people in all of the universe. But throughout his time, he came across some really tough foes. So people like Frieza, Cell, Majin Buu, and things like that. But there's something that Goku would do in order to prepare for these fights. And there are sometimes he would lose these fights and he would have to leave in order to prepare for the rematch. And what he would do was that he would go to a secluded place. So this would be places like the island where he met Master Roshi, so the bald head guy with the turtle on his back. Or he would go to this small planet, and this is where he met King Kai, so the little blue guy. And each time that he went to these places, he spent them alone, and he spent days there working on his craft, basically getting ready for this big fight. And whenever he did that, he would come back twice or even sometimes three times as strong as they originally did, and thus helping him to become the god that we know, right? The Goku that we know, if you will. And we see this in so many different movies, shows, but even in real life where people go off to a secluded place, they reinvent themselves, and then they come back being an entirely different person. We saw Batman do this in The Dark Knight, where he went to the cave and then came back, and so on and so forth, right? We even saw Aaron Rodgers, so the quarterback for the New York Jets, my New York Jets, before he became a New York Jet, he talked about going to this dark place, and he talked about going there to do some deep thinking to really figure out if he wanted to become a quarterback or if he wanted to come back and be a quarterback for the following year, right? So he went into this dark place. So again, there's so many different stories of people doing this and getting the clarity that they need. And in this podcast, I'm going to talk to you why and how this is important. So main point number one as to why you should embrace solitude, so time by yourself so that you can actually discover yourself, comes from eliminating the distractions. So distractions are the death to your dreams. And we see this with social media, with ads, with some of the crazy stunts that we see people do on TikTok. Like, people do these things because they know that your attention is the number one important asset that you have. And here's the thing, and I'm not going to make this a political thing, but a few years ago or decades ago, there was this saying that used to go throughout the African American community where they would say, if your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't try so hard to take it. And what they mean by take it is, obviously black people back in the 50s, they had to really fight for their voting rights. And even once they had their voting rights, they still tried to take it away, but through politics, through things like redlining and things like that. But the saying is still the same. If your attention, just like your vote, if it wasn't important, they wouldn't be trying so hard to take it away. If your attention wasn't so important, people would not be doing all these crazy stunts on social media, basically risking their lives to get your attention. So what does that say about your attention? What does that say about your focus? It says that it is a valuable asset. And if you were to take that attention and put it onto yourself, you actually find the rewards. You actually start to find everything that you've been looking for in terms of the answers to your questions. But for a lot of people, they're not sitting with themselves long enough to come up with the answers. Believe it or not, I was just reading a book called Don't Believe Everything You Think. And I'll actually show it to you if you're on YouTube. So don't believe everything you think. So when I was reading this book, they talked about how when you're not thinking, typically this is where all the peace and happiness comes because you're just in the moment. The author, he describes thinking as being the start of all suffering. It's when we think, we start to think about all the things that could go wrong, all the reasons why we're not good enough, right? Like, that's what the mind does. And it does it because it's trying to protect us from something, even though it's using these very ugly and nasty tactics. That's what the mind does. One part of the book, though, he talks about how when we're not thinking, we're also able to come across some of the most important, valuable information, answers that we're looking for. Okay. A great example of this, he wrote this in the book, was that Albert Einstein, he had a quote. He said, "A problem cannot be solved when the mind is in the same state that the problem was created in." So to be able to come up with the solution, we have to go to a different state of mind. Sometimes this is the subconscious that we're talking about. So essentially what we're doing is that we're stepping away from the problem and we're allowing our mind to drift so that it can access some of the stuff that we have stored in our subconscious and our data banks and all that other stuff. And when you're able to do that, you're able to come up with that one answer that can change everything. But how often are you sitting by yourself? Sometimes we're so focused on the problem or focused on what other people have done to us that we're not able to actually sit and actually tap into that subconscious. So for me, I see this a lot whenever I go for walks or jogs or I'm in the gym and I'm working out. It is actually during those times I have some of the best ideas of how to help my clients. I have some of the best ideas of how to move my business forward. Because when I'm sitting down and I'm really focused on it, sometimes I'm getting in my own way. It's like I'm thinking too hard, if you will. Now, what I want you guys to really do is to find out, where can I actually practice this solitude? Is it at home? Is it at a baseball game? Believe it or not, even though you're around a lot of people, being by yourself may still be a place of solitude. Maybe it's in your car. Maybe it's going for a jog. But I need you guys to find out, where can you have a distraction-free place for you to do some of your best, ironically, thinking, if you will. Main point number 2 as to why you should be embracing solitude to help you to discover yourself is that solitude is the only place where you can find your true desires without being tempted by others. So again, as I was mentioning, the number one goal of social media, these commercials, which is why during Super Bowl week and the Super Bowl day, you see companies spend millions of dollars on a 30-second clip. People are doing these things because they know that if they can get you to desire something, they can also get you to pay to have that desire removed. So if I desire a cupcake, right, what I may see is an ad on, I don't know, TV, Netflix, whatever it is, for, I don't know, the local bakery, if you will. If I'm not careful, that desire will cause so much pain within me that I will go outside of my way to go and get this cupcake, even though it goes against my diet. And yes, I'm currently on a diet. But what desire does is it creates this little itch, this pain, if you will, with inside of you. And the only way to get rid of that desire, if you're not careful, is to get the thing that you're desiring, that you're lusting for. And that's what happens when you find yourself being tempted by every little ad, commercial, or even some of the things that you see other people are doing, if you will, right? So it could be, let's say, relationships. You may find yourself developing a desire to be in a relationship. But let's say right now, you're actually healing from your previous relationship. If that's the case, being by yourself is probably the best thing that you can do right now. But again, if you're not careful, you would think that, hey, this is what I need, and you will go after it, even though you're not ready. So again, point number 2, solitude is a place where you can really find out what your true desires are, and you're not being tempted. During this time, really think, what makes your life work? What is it that you want your life to look like in 50 years, right? When you answer those questions, you can reverse engineer some of the things that you need to do in order to have these things in your life, okay? So if you tell yourself in 50 years, let's say you want to have, let's say, 100 properties so that you can be financially free. Well, you need to ask yourself, what do I need to do day one? How do I get that first property? We're not right now focused on how do I get 100 or having 100. Like, that's a lot. But it's all about, how do I get the first door, right? Now, we could take another example. If you want to look back on your life 50 years from now, and let's say you want to see grandkids, like a legacy, if you will, and you want to see your kids living in the house that you grew up in or the house that you bought, right? Well, if that's the case, maybe we need to, take that risk and, start dating again, or start talking about having kids, or being able to buy your own first house. And I'm not trying to make this a real estate thing, but buying your own house and then raising them in that house so you can later give it to them when they become of age, if you will, right? It's not hard to reverse engineer your life, but you have to make sure that the place that you're looking at, the end point, is truly your end point and not someone else's, okay? And you can only do that when you're in a place of solitude. Point number 3 as to why solitude is great for you is because this is where inner peace and self-reflection is had, okay? This is where inner peace and self-reflection is had. So when you're by yourself, and I need to actually pause and say this, guys, when I say go into solitude, I only mean socially. I don't mean that we're going into this dark place emotionally as well, because you can go into these these isolated places, these places of solitude. You can do this in a healthy way. So I want to make sure I say that. So when you're in this place of solitude, this can actually serve as a self-care activity that you're doing for yourself. Boundaries is something that a lot of people have struggles with because they feel if they set a boundary, people will get upset with them because they're setting a boundary. They're telling someone essentially no. And us as humans, we've been conditioned to only hear yes, or to associate someone caring about us, liking us, loving us with the word yes. And that's a big issue because sometimes a no is a form of love. And in this situation, it is a form of self-love. Now, when you're having this inner peace, I do have to warn you that it can become addictive. When you're by yourself, if you're not careful, you can get so comfortable that you lock yourself away in this inner peace. And then the demons start to come out. Demons like depression, right? Because at the end of the day, us as humans, we desire human connection. We desire to give love and receive love. This is baked into our DNA. This comes actually from back in the day. We had the hunters, the gatherers, the village town folks. You had all these groups of people that lived together because they needed to rely on each other to help carry out the task for that tribe, for that group of people. And that has continued to be true within our lives. Even to this day, being with other people is needed. So do not lose yourself within this peace. This is something temporary until you find out what it is that you want out of life or who you are. Okay, so I want to make sure I point that out. The self-reflection piece comes from also having the time to sit back and reflect on that week, on that year, on that month, and see what things have actually went really, really well for me, but also what things I can improve in. And this is the only time you can actually have that time to sit back and think. Because if you're so distracted by other people's needs, other people's wants, or even let's say your own desires and pleasures that are created by, again, Facebook ads, commercials, and things like that, you're never going to have that time to actually stop and see what is working for your life and what is working against your life. And these things are also created again in this place of solitude. So the main point number 4, as to why you should be embracing this solitude, is that to be in the top 1%, you need to disregard everything that the 99% are doing. Your path to greatness will be a lonely path, unfortunately. And the reason why is because not everybody can be great. Everyone has the opportunity, but not everybody would capitalize on that opportunity. We all have the potential to be great at what we want, but to actually execute on that is something that's an entirely different discussion. When I stop and ask myself, what is it that I want out of my life? I can easily come up and I can describe that image to you. Now, as I describe it, if I were to ask 100 other people, are these the things that they want? I do believe that a good bit of them would probably say yes. But when it comes down to the actions that are involved in having this lifestyle, right, this image, that is where you start to become a part of the 1%. One day I was listening to a podcast and it was very funny. It was a guy by named Dan Kennedy, great salesman guy. But he was interviewing someone and he said, if I were to go down the street and ask 100 people if they wanted to be a millionaire, I guarantee you all of them would say yes. But when you show them the steps to becoming a millionaire, probably one, and maybe even not even that many, will actually take the actions necessary to become a millionaire. This is what it looks like to be a part of the 1%. This is why solitude is so important. And I'll even say this as I wrap up. The solitude in this instance, you may not be physically by yourself, but mentally, or the actions that you take may be that of being by yourself. So you may go to a conference, you may be sitting with coworkers, you may be sitting with a group of friends, and yes, you guys are all working towards the same thing. But when it comes to that level of discipline and consistency, like, are they able to do it? Are they able to stick in it just like you? That's where you find that you're really on this path by yourself. Because they're, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, they will start to drop off one by one. And I don't want that to happen to you. So prepare to be by yourself. It's not a bad thing, okay? But it's more so a part of the reality of being a part of the 1%. So real quick, I'm going to summarize these 4 main points as to why you should be embracing the solitude. So point number 1 was that distractions are truly the death of your dreams. So make sure that you're staying focused, guys. Point number 2 is that solitude can be a place where you find out your true desires without being tempted. And then point number 3 is that your inner peace and reflection, they live in this place of solitude. And again, with this inner peace, it can be addicting. So make sure that you have limits even on that. And then point number 4, to be in the top 1%, you'll have to shed the 99%. And that's unfortunate, but also it can be fortunate, because when you're a 1%er, eventually you'll meet other 1%ers in your life as well. So this is Coach Wells, and thank you for checking out this podcast. And make sure you hit the subscribe button. All right, see you later.